start with the political battle lines already being drawn over the replacement for Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy, who has announced he is retiring. Justice Kennedy made that announcement yesterday, saying he will step down at the end of the month. His decision paving the way for the most significant change in the High Court's makeup in a half-century. The move will allow President Trump the chance to shape the court into a solidly conservative one for years, if not generations, to come. Despite his refusal to consider President Obama's nomination of Judge Merrick Garland to replace the late Justice Antonin Scalia ahead of the 2016 election, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell made it clear yesterday he expects to begin the process of replacing Justice Kennedy as soon as possible.
We will vote to confirm Justice Kennedy's successor this fall. It's imperative that the president's nominee be considered fairly and not subjected to personal attacks.
All right, so John Meacham, yesterday there were several people who were shocked at this news, and saw quite a few people actually with blue check marks by their name saying this was the bleakest moment in their life and they just didn't know how they were going to move forward with it. There are many things that Donald Trump does that we criticize and talk about.
Cause concern.
Cause great concern and they are actually violations of constitutional norms. Just for our friends that are suggesting the same here, when you elect presidents, this is what happens. And when Hillary Clinton didn't visit Wisconsin and didn't visit Michigan enough. Yep. And when we saw a young woman yesterday with a campaign, a message that was more inspiring in 3 minutes than what Hillary Clinton gave us in 2 years, they can complain about internet, this and that, and the press did this and they should have done that. But the fact is, Hillary never had a message. She ran a horrible campaign. And this is the consequence of it. Is it not? I mean, what Donald Trump did yesterday is what presidents do. And by the way, if Mitch McConnell subverted what should be the Senate's constitutional norms of checks and balances, well, then, damn it, Democrats can try to do the same thing.
Well, yesterday was delivery day for a lot of Republicans, and a lot of the Republicans I've talked to who voted for Trump unhappily because they were for Jeb. Intellectually, they were maybe for Rubio. By the end, they were for Kasich. But when it came down to it, they voted for Donald Trump, and he is president, not least because, not only because, but not least because those people wanted fewer taxes and more justices. That's what this was about. Well,
and I will say, it was as someone, Noah, that was very critical of George W. Bush. When George W. Bush left, I was bitterly disappointed in the way he spent money, the way he ran up deficits, the way he ran up the debt, the $7 trillion Medicare expansion that he didn't pay for, reckless wars. But at the end, I would always have to say, but he gave conservatives 2 justices, and he gave America a big tax cut. And I was saying that about George W. Bush. A lot of people that voted for Donald Trump now were probably saying the same thing about him.
Yeah, to John's point, if you're a Republican who voted for justices, you're very happy with how this term went for conservative causes, conservative intellectual philosophies, legal philosophies. It was a good term, and the extent to which they have another opportunity to put a conservative justice on the court will only solidify that. Democrats appear to know that. The left is very outraged over this. They're in an existential crisis. They say we need to do everything we possibly can. E.J. Dionne has a piece in the Washington Post, do everything we possibly can. Missing from that is what they're supposed to do.
Right.
He sort of ominously says civility might be an obstacle to that imperative. But to the extent that there's any governmental institution, any mechanism that they can appeal to stop this, it doesn't exist. Democrats made their bed in 2013. Yeah. It was completed in 2017. End of story.
Well, it seems to me that if they're going to do anything, they're going to have to look at a few of the Republicans, Jonathan, who will be very uncomfortable casting their vote to support a nominee that will end Roe v. Wade. And with Susan Collins, with Lisa Murkowski, you have two Republicans right there. Then the trick is, how do you hold Joe Manchin? How do you hold Heidi Heitkamp on the Democratic side?
Yeah, you hit the big two in Collins and Murkowski there in terms of if Roe v. Wade does become sort of the litmus test for this justice. But, to piggyback on this point, I covered the Trump campaign, and night after night at these rallies, you would talk to people who were sort of suggesting they were almost holding their nose to vote for the president because they knew they had hoped they would get a justice delivered in return. And this sort of is the culmination of a long-term Republican strategy to focus on the courts. They obviously elevated in such importance. They're always important, but we saw in the case in 2000 that delivered George W. Bush the White House, that was sort of crystallized for a lot of people what these courts matter. And you have seen Mitch McConnell, the decision he made in 2016 to not bring Merrick Garland for a vote, and that they decided that this is a moment where this could give Republicans a chance to reshape the court for decades and give it sort of a conservative bulwark against rising sort of demographic changes across the country that would seem to favor Democrats. The country is becoming, more urban and less white. But this is a moment where Republicans are going to install, through Donald Trump, an imperfect messenger perhaps for a lot of Republican values, at least two and potentially more justices.
So
You can cut the perhaps.
John, really quickly, I was actually reading a New York article called McPolitics, and in it, the journalist started with the story of the boss in West Virginia asking the Kennedys how much money do you need to help swing.
That's a great
to help swing West Virginia for Kennedy.
Yeah.
He said, I was looking at about 35, thinking $3,500. That's a heck of a payday. The Kennedys come with a briefcase with $35,000, hand it to him.
Right.
He opens it up. He says, okay, I'm good. And I'm not saying that's how politics should be. I'm saying, though, the point was, you used to be able to go to party bosses and say, how do we win these states? Now it's not won locally, whether by that way or knocking on doors. Now it's always a national referendum on something, and courts are probably one of the biggest ways. Conservatives especially have turned it from all politics is local to a politics enterprise.
A franchise politics,
Yeah.
There are two, there were two moments that really made that happen in the post-war era. Obviously Brown, which radicalized the white right in the South, and the other was the 62 school prayer decision.
Right.
I'm sure you had people in Pensacola who would tell you that the beginning of the end of America was
fluoride.
Was 1962. And I used to go to rallies.
Okay, prayer in school, but fluoride was a close second.
But it was on those posters. Quickly.
By the way, there's some people that don't know that. That used to be the great John Birch conspiracy that they were putting fluoride in your water and it was going to mess up your brain.
This era began, the Kennedy, the Anthony Kennedy era began with partisan hysteria because Ted Kennedy went to the floor of the Senate and gave a speech saying that in Robert Bork's America, there were segregated lunch counters, there were back alley abortions. And if you ask Republicans, if you ask conservatives, where did the hyper-partisan era begin, they say it was Ted Kennedy. Democrats say it was Newt Gingrich. And now to me, what's so fascinating is it's ending with the same kind of partisan.
By the way, I still remember where I was when I heard Ted Kennedy's speech.
Yeah.
And it was an offensive speech. It was so over the top. It was so hateful. And it did. It elevated Supreme Court picks onto a level they had never been elevated to before. And Democrats followed up then going after Clarence Thomas. And then we were off to the races. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.